The Great Hall of Zenith 7 stretched for nearly a kilometer, its ceiling lost in artificial clouds that sparkled with tiny lights meant to represent 1,000 different homeworlds. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the human podium, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture of military discipline she could never quite shake. Around her, the representatives of 47 different species watched with eyes that ranged from sympathetic to openly hostile. She had been speaking for nearly an hour, defending Earth's colonial policies to a council that had already made up its mind. The charges were simple. Humanity expanded too quickly, claimed too many worlds, and refused to follow the established protocols that had kept peace in the galaxy for 3,000 years. "We follow the same rules as everyone else," Sarah said, her voice carrying through the translation devices worn by every delegate. "We survey a world. We check for intelligent life. We file the proper claims. The only difference is that we actually use the worlds we claim." A ripple of disapproval moved through the chamber. The Peltharian delegate, a floating jellyfish-like creature in a tank of blue liquid, pulsed with orange frustration. "The difference, Ambassador Chen, is that your species colonizes planets that would kill any civilized being within hours. Your standards for habitability are disturbing." Sarah allowed herself a thin smile. It was true. Humans had claimed worlds with gravity that would crush most species, atmospheres that were barely breathable, and temperature ranges that swung from freezing to boiling. To humans, these were challenging colonies. To everyone else, they were death sentences. "We colonize worlds that suit us," Sarah replied, "just as every other species does." "You colonize death worlds." A new voice cut through the chamber. It belonged to Commander Zekthor of the Vraxian hegemony, a towering reptilian creature whose scales gleamed like polished bronze under the hall's lights. He rose from his seat, his tail swishing behind him in agitation. "Your entire species evolved on a death world. High gravity, extreme weather, predators at every level of the food chain. You survived by becoming predators yourselves." Zekthor descended the steps toward the central floor where Sarah stood. He was twice her height, and his teeth, when he bared them, were designed to tear flesh. The theatrical move was designed to intimidate. Sarah had seen worse in corporate boardrooms back on Earth. "Is there a question, Commander?" she asked calmly. "Not a question. A statement." Zekthor reached the floor and began to circle her slowly. "Humanity is dangerous. You fight each other constantly. Your history is written in blood. You have weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering. You celebrate warriors in war. You are not a civilized species, Ambassador Chen. You are barbarians with starships." The chamber fell silent. Even the species sympathetic to humanity seemed uncertain how to respond. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice level. "We have had peace on Earth for nearly 200 years, Commander. We have not initiated conflict with any galactic power. We have honored every treaty we have signed." "Because you were too weak to do otherwise," Zekthor hissed. "But now you grow bold. You spread like a virus across worlds that should remain empty. You build weapons that violate the spirit, if not the letter, of galactic law. You train every citizen in combat skills. What kind of civilization does that?" "The kind that remembers its history," Sarah shot back. "We learned long ago that peace is only possible when good people are willing to defend it." Zekthor's laugh was a harsh sound that made several delegates flinch. "Defend it? Is that what you call your expansion? You are not defenders, human. You are conquerors waiting to happen." The Galactic Council's first speaker, an ancient being whose species name was unpronounceable by human tongues, raised a crystalline appendage for silence. "This debate has consumed enough time. Commander Zekthor, do you have a formal proposal?" "I do," Zekthor said. He had stopped circling Sarah and now faced the Council directly. "I propose that humanity be restricted to their current territorial holdings. No new colonies, no new claims, and a peacekeeping force should be stationed in human space to ensure compliance." Sarah's blood ran cold. That was essentially a blockade. It would strangle human expansion and make Earth dependent on other species for resources. It would reduce humanity to second-class status in the galactic community. "That is unacceptable," she said firmly. "Humanity will not agree to restrictions that do not apply equally to all species. Then perhaps humanity needs to learn what happens when primitives refuse the guidance of their betters," Zekthor said quietly. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Sarah took a step forward, her hand instinctively moving toward her hip where her sidearm would have been if weapons were permitted in the council chambers. Was that a threat, Commander? A prediction, Zekthor replied. The galaxy is governed by rules that have maintained peace for millennia. Species that cannot follow those rules find themselves excluded from galactic society, or worse. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but her earpiece suddenly crackled to life. Her aide's voice was urgent. Ambassador, we have an emergency. The trade delegation on Vraxian Prime. They are not responding to communications. Ice flooded Sarah's veins. Her brother David was part of that delegation. 6 humans negotiating mineral rights on the Vraxian homeworld. She had sent him there personally, believing that face-to-face diplomacy was important. She turned to Zekthor, and something in her expression must have shown her fear, because the commander's smile widened. Is something wrong, Ambassador? Before she could answer, the main viewing screen activated. The first speaker had not authorized this. Someone had hacked the Council's systems. The image that appeared made Sarah's heart stop. The 6 members of the human trade delegation knelt in a public square on Vraxian Prime. Vraxian soldiers stood behind them, weapons drawn. The humans were bound and gagged. Sarah recognized her brother immediately. David looked directly at the camera, his eyes defiant even as blood ran down his face from a cut above his eye. Zekthor appeared on screen, this very commander, but the footage was recorded hours earlier. His voice boomed through the council chamber. Let this be a lesson to all who would challenge the natural order of the galaxy. Humanity is a young species, an aggressive species, a dangerous species, but they are not invincible. Sarah watched in horror as the soldiers raised their weapons. She tried to move, to run, to do something, but her legs would not obey. The council chamber erupted in chaos, delegates shouting, but she heard none of it. The weapons fired. The 6 humans fell. The screen went black. Sarah stood frozen, her mind refusing to process what she had just witnessed. Around her, the chamber descended into pandemonium. Some species were shouting in outrage. Others were calling for order. A few seemed to be congratulating Zekthor, who stood with his arms crossed, looking satisfied. The first speaker's voice finally cut through the noise. This session is adjourned. Commander Zekthor, you will surrender yourself for investigation into this incident. But Zekthor was already walking toward the exit, flanked by his guards. I am a military commander acting within my authority. The humans were spies and saboteurs. I executed them according to Vraxian law. The council has no jurisdiction. He paused at the doorway and looked back at Sarah. Tell your people to be grateful I showed mercy. They died quickly. Then he was gone. Sarah finally found her voice. It came out as a whisper that somehow carried through the silent chamber. You just made a terrible mistake. She activated her communication device. This is Ambassador Chen. Priority Alpha transmission to Earth Command. Tell them what happened here. Tell them David is gone. Tell them, her voice broke. She took a breath and continued, her tone now cold as vacuum. Tell them to begin mobilization. All fleets. Full combat readiness. The first speaker moved closer. Ambassador Chen, please. We can resolve this through diplomatic channels. War benefits no one. Sarah looked at the ancient being with eyes that held no tears, only a burning fury that made several nearby delegates step back. You should have thought of that before you let him murder our people on your broadcast system. Earth is done talking. She walked out of the council chambers with her back straight and her head high. Behind her, the galaxy's representatives began to realize they might have severely miscalculated. Earth's response came within the hour. Complete communication silence. Every human ship, every embassy, every trade post went dark simultaneously. To the Galactic Council it looked like fear. They had no idea what was coming. Commander Zekthor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the stars streak past as his fleet moved through faster-than-light travel. 300 warships followed his command. The largest military force the Vraxian hegemony had assembled in 500 years. It was by any measure overwhelming force. His tactical officer approached, moving with the careful precision of a junior officer, addressing a superior who had just committed what might be considered an act of war. Commander, the human colonies in the outer reaches are 2 days away at current speed. Intelligence reports minimal defensive capabilities. The largest settlement, New Prospect, has a population of approximately 50,000. 50,000 primitives playing at civilization, Zekthor said, his tail swishing in satisfaction. They will surrender the moment they see our fleet. Humans are bullies. Bullies always fold when confronted with real power. The tactical officer hesitated. Sir, there is something in the intelligence reports you should review. About human biology and psychology. Zekthor turned his massive head. Explain. The officer brought up a holographic display. Images of humans appeared along with dense text in Vraxion script. Dr. Zelrian, our xenobiologist, has compiled data on human physiology. It is quite unusual, sir. Their world has twice the gravity of our homeworld. Their atmosphere has a much higher oxygen content. Their planet is covered in predators, and humans evolved as both predators and prey. I know they come from a death world. Zekthor interrupted. That is why they must be contained. Continue. The officer highlighted specific sections. Sir, humans have redundant organs. 2 lungs, 2 kidneys, 2 eyes, 2 ears. If one fails, they can continue functioning. Their blood clots rapidly. Their bones are incredibly dense. They have a chemical response to danger called adrenaline that increases their strength and suppresses their pain response. Zekthor waved a clawed hand dismissively. Every species has adaptations. What is your point? Sir, most species in the galaxy surrender when casualties reach 5 to 10%. Our own forces generally retreat at 15% losses. According to historical records, humans have fought battles where casualties exceeded 50%, and they did not surrender. In some cases, they fought to the last individual. The commander laughed, a sound like grinding rocks. Primitive savagery. They have not yet evolved past their animal nature. When they see modern warfare, they will understand they are outmatched. The officer looked uncomfortable. There is more, sir. Human recreational activities include something they call extreme sports. They intentionally put themselves in danger for entertainment. They jump from aircraft with fabric parachutes. They climb mountains that kill a significant percentage of those who attempt them. They engage in combat sports where they hit each other until one loses consciousness. Madness, Zekthor said. Perhaps, the officer agreed. But Dr. Zelrian believes it indicates that humans have a completely different relationship with danger and death than civilized species. His report recommends extreme caution in any military engagement. Dr. Zelrian is a scientist, not a warrior, Zekthor said. I have seen combat on a dozen worlds. I have led campaigns against the Krolith swarms and the Silicon Collective. I know how battles are won, and I know that when a primitive species faces a superior force, they surrender, or they die. The officer saluted and returned to his station. Zekthor looked at the fleet display with satisfaction. 300 ships against a mining colony, with perhaps a few patrol boats and personal weapons. It would not even qualify as a battle. The humans would see the fleet, realize resistance was futile, and surrender. Then the rest of humanity would understand that their expansion was over. He had made his point with the trade delegation. 6 deaths to prevent a war. Some would call it mercy. Once the Outer Reach colony surrendered, Earth would have no choice but to accept the Council's restrictions. The Vraxian hegemony would be remembered as the power that brought the dangerous humans to heel. 2 days later, the fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the new Prospect system. The colony orbited a harsh world that would have been considered uninhabitable by any sane species. Temperature swings of 100 degrees. Gravity 30% above galactic standard. An atmosphere with an oxygen content that would be toxic to most species over extended exposure. Perfect for humans, Zekthor muttered. They chose to live in hell. Sir, scanning the system now, the sensor officer reported. I am detecting the mining colony on the 3rd planet. Multiple installations on the surface and 3 orbital platforms. I am also detecting energy signatures consistent with defensive weapons. How many ships? No warships, sir. Some cargo vessels and mining craft. Nothing that could threaten even a single vessel in our fleet. Zekthor smiled. Open a communication channel to the colony. All frequencies. The communications officer worked for a moment, then nodded. Channel open, sir. Attention, human colony of New Prospect, Zekthor began, his voice carrying across the void of space. This is Commander Zekthor of the Vraxian hegemony. You are hereby ordered to surrender immediately. Power down all defensive systems. Prepare for occupation. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. You have 1 standard hour to comply. He cut the transmission and settled back in his command chair. Now we wait for their surrender. 58 minutes passed in silence. The fleet held position, weapons charged but not yet deployed. Zekthor watched the clock count down, confident that in the final minutes the humans would send their capitulation. The last minute ticked away. No response came. "Sir," the communications officer said nervously, "the hour has expired. The colony has not responded." Zekthor felt a flicker of annoyance. Perhaps they did not understand. "Send the message again. Make it clear that refusal to surrender will result in the destruction of their installations." The message was sent again. Another hour passed. Still no response from the colony. "Are our communications reaching them?" Zekthor demanded. "Yes, sir. The signal is strong and clear. They are receiving our transmissions. They are simply choosing not to respond." This was not supposed to happen. Populations faced with certain destruction did not ignore warnings. They begged for mercy or they negotiated terms. They did not sit in silence. "Perhaps they are afraid to respond," the tactical officer suggested. "We did execute their diplomats without warning. All the more reason for them to surrender," Zekthor snapped. He leaned forward in his chair. "Very well. If they will not talk, they will listen. Target their orbital platforms. Destroy one. Show them we are serious." The weapons officer input the commands. 3 ships moved forward and opened fire. The nearest orbital platform, a structure designed for processing asteroid minerals, shattered under the barrage. Debris scattered across orbital space. Surely now they would respond. Surely now they would understand. Instead, alarms suddenly screamed across the Eternal Dominion's bridge. The sensor officer's voice rose in panic. "Sir, the colony's surface installations are powering up weapons. They are targeting our ships." "What weapons?" Zekthor roared. "Our intelligence said they had minimal defenses. Mining lasers, sir. Industrial equipment. They are adapting civilian machinery for combat use." It was laughable. Mining lasers against military-grade shields. But then the first beam struck one of his frigates and the ship's shields flickered. The lasers were designed to cut through asteroid rock that could resist extreme temperatures. They were crude, unrefined, but they were powerful. "Return fire," Zekthor ordered. "Destroy those installations." His fleet opened fire on the surface installations. Explosions bloomed on the planet below as mining facilities, processing plants, and habitation domes were hit. But the humans did not stop firing. Even as their structures collapsed around them, the weapons continued to operate until they were completely destroyed. "Sir," the tactical officer said, his voice strange, "they are not evacuating. The humans are staying at their posts even as we destroy their positions." "Then they are fools," Zekthor said, but something cold was forming in his stomach. Dr. Zelrian's report echoed in his mind. Humans have a different relationship with danger and death. The communications officer suddenly spoke up. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the colony. Audio only. Put it through," Zekthor commanded. A human voice came through the speakers, calm and matter-of-fact despite the destruction raining down on the colony. "Commander Zekthor, this is Governor Maria Santos of New Prospect. We received your surrender demand. Here is our response. Go to hell." The transmission cut off. Zekthor stared at the communication station in disbelief. They were dying. Their colony was being destroyed around them, and they were still defiant. "Sir," the sensor officer said urgently, "I am detecting multiple small craft launching from the colony. Mining ships, personal transports, anything that can fly. They are attempting to evacuate, finally," Zekthor thought. "Finally they run." But then the tactical officer spoke and his words made no sense. "Sir, the evacuation craft are not fleeing the system. They are broadcasting our attack on all frequencies. They are sending it to every human colony in known space." Zekthor understood then what he had done. He had not just attacked a colony. He had attacked it in a way that would be witnessed by every human in the galaxy. He had given them martyr. The mining colony of New Prospect was dying, but it was not dying quietly. Governor Maria Santos crouched behind the wreckage of what had been the administrative center and checked her weapon. It was a simple plasma cutter, the kind used to slice through rock and metal in the mines. Now it was pointed at the sky where Fraxion troop transports were descending through the smoke and flames. Around her, the remains of the colony's defense force prepared for what was coming. They were not soldiers. There was old Jacob Chen, 70 years old, who had come to New Prospect to retire after 40 years of asteroid mining. There was young Sarah Mitchell, barely 20, who had been studying xenobiology before the attack. There was Marcus Webb, the chief engineer, whose wife and daughter had made it onto one of the last evacuation ships. None of them should have been warriors, but they were humans, and humans had learned long ago that survival sometimes meant fighting when the odds were impossible. "How many ships?" Maria asked Marcus, who was monitoring their salvaged sensors. 12 transports incoming, he replied. Estimating 200 soldiers per transport, so about 2,400 total. Maria did a quick count of their forces. 83 people, most injured, limited ammunition, no heavy weapons, against 2,400 professional soldiers with advanced technology. The numbers should have been cause for immediate surrender. But Maria remembered the broadcast from Commander Zekthor before he destroyed their orbital platform. She remembered his arrogant certainty that humans would fold when faced with real power. "Listen up," she called out to her people. "No one will blame you if you want to surrender. We are outgunned and outnumbered. If you want to lay down your weapons and wait for them to take you prisoner, I understand." She waited. No one moved. Jacob Chen laughed, a sound like grinding gravel. "Governor, I lived through the Titan Wars. I watched my friends die in vacuum. I came here to spend my last years in peace." He checked the charge on his weapon. "But if I have to die fighting, at least it will not be boring." Sarah Mitchell nodded. "They killed my brother at the orbital platform. He was just monitoring sensors. They did not even warn him." Her hands shook as she spoke, but her voice was steady. "I want them to remember his name." One by one, the others expressed the same sentiment. They would fight, not because they could win, but because surrender was not in them. The transports landed in a rough circle around their position. Doors opened and Vraxian soldiers poured out. They were impressive specimens, each standing nearly 3 meters tall, armed with plasma rifles and protected by advanced combat armor. They moved with the confidence of a force that had never known defeat. The first squad advanced toward the human position. Maria waited until they were close enough to see their reptilian faces behind their helmet visors. Then she gave the signal. The humans opened fire. The plasma cutters were not designed as weapons, but they cut through the Vraxian armor with brutal efficiency. The first squad went down before they understood what was happening. The second squad returned fire, and the battle became chaos. Maria had read the intelligence reports about alien combat tactics. Most species fought in organized formations. They used cover effectively. They retreated when casualties became unsustainable. They had learned warfare as a science, refined over thousands of years of civilized conflict. Humans had learned warfare by killing each other for 10,000 years. They knew every dirty trick, every desperate gambit, every way to kill that evolution and necessity could teach. The battle quickly descended into close-quarters combat. The Vraxians had superior weapons and armor, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to stop fighting. Jacob Chen took a plasma bolt to the chest that should have killed him instantly. Instead, he stayed on his feet for another 30 seconds, long enough to detonate the mining charge he was carrying and take out 5 Vraxian soldiers. Sarah Mitchell was hit in the arm, then the leg. She kept firing until her weapon overheated. Then she grabbed a fallen Vraxian's rifle and used that. When that ran out of power, she used the rifle as a club until a Vraxian soldier shot her at point-blank range. Marcus Webb used his knowledge of the colony's infrastructure to turn the battlefield into a death trap. He remotely detonated fuel cells, collapsed tunnels, and activated industrial machinery that crushed soldiers who had not expected the environment itself to be weaponized. The Vraxians began to understand that something was wrong. Their casualties were mounting far beyond acceptable levels. The humans fought like cornered animals, except animals had the sense to flee when they were beaten. These humans fought harder the more desperate their situation became. A Vraxian officer tried to establish a command post in what had been the colony's medical center. Maria led a squad of 12 humans in an assault that should have been suicide. They used smoke from burning buildings for cover, moved through tunnels the Vraxians were too large to navigate, and attacked from 3 directions at once. The Vraxians defending the position retreated. They actually retreated, something that shocked both sides. In Vraxian military doctrine, retreat was only authorized when casualties exceeded 15%. They had lost 8% of their force, and they were falling back. Maria's squad pressed the advantage. They were down to 7 people now, all wounded, but they moved like ghosts through the ruins of their home. They had grown up on a death world. Their ancestors had survived ice ages, plagues, and predators that should have driven them to extinction. They had evolved to be the most dangerous predators on their planet. Now they were showing the galaxy what that meant. Commander Zekthor watched the battle from orbit and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear. His ground forces were not just losing. They were being slaughtered by a force 1/30th their size. The casualty reports were impossible. 47% losses and climbing. "Sir," his tactical officer said quietly, "we have lost contact with 3 companies. The humans are using tactics we have never encountered. They fight to the death. They use their wounded as bait to lure our soldiers into traps. They are employing weapons we did not know existed. Sir, our forces are requesting permission to withdraw." Zekthor wanted to refuse. To retreat from a force of barely trained civilians was unthinkable, but he was watching his army die and he could not explain how it was happening. "Pull back the ground forces," he ordered, the words bitter in his mouth. "Orbital bombardment. Destroy everything. Leave nothing standing." The ships in orbit opened fire, not with precision strikes but with overwhelming destructive force. They turned the surface of New Prospect into a sea of fire and glass. Nothing could survive such an attack. But before the bombardment began, Maria Santos transmitted one final message. It was short, just 10 seconds, but it would echo across human space and beyond. "This is New Prospect. We held. We made them pay. Tell Earth what happened here. Tell them to make sure our deaths mean something." Then the fire fell from the sky, and New Prospect ceased to exist. 3 days later, Admiral Marcus Williams stood on the bridge of the carrier Vengeance and watched the recorded footage from New Prospect for the 100th time. His hands gripped the railing so hard his knuckles turned white. "How many?" he asked his intelligence officer. "Best estimates, sir. The colonists killed or seriously wounded approximately 1,100 Vraxian soldiers before the orbital bombardment. Final casualty ratio was roughly 14-1 in their favor. Admiral Williams had fought in the Titan Wars. He had commanded fleets in battles that killed thousands. He had seen humanity at its worst and its best, but he had never seen anything like what happened at New Prospect. 83 civilians had held off 2,400 professional soldiers, long enough to evacuate nearly 40,000 of their fellow colonists. They had fought with mining equipment and personal weapons against military-grade hardware. And they had won, in the only way that mattered. They had made the enemy pay a price too terrible to sustain. "Broadcast this to the fleet," Williams ordered. "Every ship, every sailor, every Marine. I want them to see what happened at New Prospect. I want them to understand what we are fighting for." His second-in-command approached. "Sir, the fleet is assembled. 20 carrier groups, 600 ships total. We are ready to engage the Vraxian forces." Williams looked at the star map showing the location of Zekthor's fleet. They were celebrating their victory, broadcasting propaganda about how they had crushed the human uprising. They thought they had won. "Do we have a location on Commander Zekthor?" Williams asked. "Yes, sir. His flagship is at the center of their formation." Williams smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Good. I want him alive if possible. He is going to stand trial for what he did. But first we are going to show the galaxy what happens when you murder humans and think there will be no consequences." He turned to his communications officer. "Signal the fleet. Battle formation Reaper. No mercy. No quarter. We do not stop until Zekthor surrenders or his entire fleet is debris." The officer hesitated. "Sir, battle formation Reaper is designed for total warfare. We have not used it since the Titan Wars. The casualties we. The Vraxian fleet detected the approaching human forces exactly 18 hours after the destruction of New Prospect. Commander Zekthor had expected retaliation, but he had also expected it to take weeks or months for humanity to organize a response. The speed of their deployment told him something disturbing. Earth had been preparing for war long before he fired the first shot. "How many ships?" he demanded. His sensor officer studied the displays with growing alarm. "Sir, I am reading 600 vessels, 20 carrier groups in full battle formation, They are moving at maximum combat speed directly toward our position. Zekthor forced himself to remain calm. 600 ships against his 300. The numbers were not favorable, but they were not impossible. The Vraxian hegemony had superior technology, better trained crews, and a military tradition stretching back thousands of years. Humans were aggressive, yes, but aggression without discipline led to defeat. Ready all weapons, he ordered. Deploy fighter screen. Prepare defensive formations. We will show these primitives what happens when they challenge a superior force. The two fleets closed the distance rapidly. At 50,000 kilometers, the human fleet did something that made no tactical sense. Instead of slowing to engage at optimal weapons range, they accelerated. They were rushing directly into combat at speeds that would make precise maneuvering nearly impossible. Sir, they are not slowing down, the tactical officer reported. They are going to overshoot their optimal firing positions. Then we have them, Zekthor said. All ships prepare to fire as they pass through our kill zone. Their momentum will carry them through before they can respond effectively. But the humans never entered the kill zone the way Zekthor expected. At 20,000 kilometers, the human carrier group split apart in a maneuver that was either brilliant or insane. Half the fleet angled upward, half angled downward, and they swept around the Vraxian formation like the jaws of some massive predator. They are surrounding us, the tactical officer said in disbelief. They are sacrificing formation integrity to achieve envelopment. In traditional galactic warfare, maintaining formation integrity was paramount. Ships supported each other, created overlapping fields of fire, and retreated in an orderly fashion when necessary. Breaking formation was something you did only in desperation. The humans had broken formation as an opening move. All ships engage at will, Zekthor ordered. Target the carriers. Without their command ships, their fleet will fall apart. The Vraxian fleet opened fire. Plasma bolts and missile salvos streaked across the void. Several human ships took direct hits, their shields flaring and failing. 2 destroyers exploded outright. But the human fleet did not slow down or retreat. They accelerated into the fire. Then the human ships returned fire, and Zekthor understood that something was very wrong. The humans were not using standard engagement tactics. Their ships fired everything at once. Railguns and missiles and energy, weapons in a coordinated barrage that overwhelmed the Vraxian defensive systems through sheer volume. 3 Vraxian cruisers lost shields simultaneously and took critical damage. One lost power and began to drift. Another's reactor went critical and exploded. The third managed to limp away, trailing atmosphere and debris. Sir, the tactical officer said, his voice rising. The humans are using tactics from their intercolony wars. They are treating this like a knife fight, not a proper engagement. Zekthor knew about the human conflicts. Brief, brutal wars where entire fleets were destroyed in hours rather than the weeks or months of traditional galactic warfare. He had dismissed those reports as exaggerations. He was beginning to understand they were not. A human destroyer broke from the main formation and accelerated directly toward the Eternal Dominion. Zekthor's weapons officer targeted it immediately, hitting it with enough firepower to destroy 2 ships. The destroyer's shields failed. Its armor melted. Its engines went offline, but it did not stop. Using momentum alone, the dying ship continued toward the flagship. The crew had overloaded the reactor. They were turning their ship into a missile. Evasive maneuvers, Zekthor shouted. The Eternal Dominion was a massive dreadnought, powerful but not agile. The dying destroyer came closer. At the last moment, Zekthor's helmsman managed to angle the flagship just enough that the explosion clipped the port side instead of hitting center mass. The shock wave threw everyone on the bridge to the deck. Alarms screamed. Hull breaches on 8 decks. Shield generators offline. One of the main engines damaged. Damage report, Zekthor demanded, pulling himself back to his feet. Before anyone could answer, more alarms sounded. Human boarding pods had attached to the hull. They were sending soldiers onto his ship. In the middle of a space battle, they were attempting to board a dreadnought. Impossible, Zekthor breathed. No one boards a ship during a fleet action. It is too chaotic, too dangerous. But the humans were doing it anyway, and not just to the Eternal Dominion. Across the battlefield, human marines were boarding Vraxian ships, turning a space battle into dozens of close-quarters fights. Security teams to all breach points, Zekthor ordered. Repel boarders. The reports that came back were nightmarish. The human marines were not just soldiers. They were something else entirely. They fought in vacuum with powered armor. They used weapons designed for ship interiors, flechette rounds that shredded flesh but did not penetrate hulls. They moved through the ships like they had trained for this their entire lives, and perhaps they had. Earth's military trained every soldier for boarding actions, for fighting in zero gravity, for combat in conditions that would kill most species. It was considered paranoid by galactic standards. Now it was proving devastatingly effective. On the bridge of the Vengeance, Admiral Williams watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. The Vraxian fleet was in disarray. They had expected a traditional engagement, a careful dance where both sides maneuvered and fired from a distance. They had not expected humans to bring knife-fighting tactics to a space battle. "Sir, boarding teams report they have secured the engineering sections on 6 Vraxian cruisers," his tactical officer reported. "They are preparing to sabotage the reactors." "Negative," Williams said. "Tell them to secure the ships intact if possible. We can use them. And I want prisoners. I want every Vraxian soldier who survives this to go home and tell their people what happened here." His second-in-command looked uncomfortable. "Sir, the Vraxian casualties are approaching 50%. At this rate, their fleet will be combat ineffective within the hour." Williams nodded. 50% casualties. Most galactic species would have surrendered by now. But the Vraxians were proud and Zekthor was stubborn. They would fight until their fleet was destroyed, unless Williams gave them another option. "Open a channel to the Vraxian flagship," he ordered. The communications officer worked for a moment. "Channel open, sir. The Eternal Dominion is receiving." "Commander Zekthor," Williams said, his voice carrying across the void between the fleets. "This is Admiral Marcus Williams of the Earth Defense Fleet. Your fleet is destroyed. You have lost half your ships and more are falling every minute. I am offering you one chance to surrender." There was a long pause. Then Zekthor's voice came through, filled with pain and rage. "Humans do not take prisoners. You fight to extermination. Why would you offer surrender?" "Because we are not like you," Williams replied. "You murdered civilians and called it justice. You destroyed a colony and called it victory. But we are better than that. Surrender now and you will be treated according to the laws of war. You will be tried for your crimes, but you will live. Refuse and I will turn your entire fleet into debris." Another pause. Williams could imagine Zekthor on his damaged bridge weighing his options. Pride versus survival, the warrior's code versus reality. "How do I know you will honor your word?" Zekthor asked finally. "You do not," Williams admitted. "But ask yourself this. We have been telling you we are civilized, and you have been telling us we are barbarians. New Prospect showed you what humans do when you try to exterminate us. Now let me show you what humans do when you surrender." The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Then Zekthor's voice came back, defeated and quiet. "Very well, Admiral. I surrender. I order my fleet to stand down." Williams allowed himself a small smile. "Smart choice, Commander. Order your ships to power down weapons and prepare to be boarded. Any ship that resists will be destroyed. You have 10 minutes to comply." He cut the transmission and looked at his crew. "Prepare boarding teams. I want every Vraxian ship secured. Treat the prisoners according to protocol. Medical care for the wounded, proper confinement for the healthy, and get Commander Zekthor off that ship and into our brig. He has an appointment with a war crimes tribunal." As the human forces began securing the surrendered Vraxian ships, broadcasts of the battle were already spreading across the galaxy. The Galactic Council, watching from their station, saw something they had never witnessed before. Humanity had not just won a battle. They had decisively defeated a major galactic power in less than 3 hours. They had used tactics that were considered reckless by galactic standards and had proven them devastatingly effective. And most terrifying of all, they had shown mercy when they could have shown vengeance. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humans were more than just violent primitives. The War Crimes Tribunal convened 3 months after the Battle of New Prospect. The venue was neutral territory, a space station maintained by the Galactic Council specifically for such proceedings. Representatives from 40 different species attended, along with journalists and observers from across known space. The chamber was filled to capacity. Commander Zekthor stood in the defendant's enclosure, his hands bound by ceremonial chains. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by defeat. Beside him stood his legal advocate, a Peltharian jurist who had argued for mercy based on Vraxian military tradition and the fog of war. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in the prosecution section. She had volunteered to present the case against Zekthor personally. It was not about revenge, she had told herself. It was about justice. But when she looked at the commander who had ordered her brother's execution, she felt the fury burning inside her chest like a small sun. The presiding magistrate, an ancient being whose species had maintained galactic law for 6,000 years, called the chamber to order. This tribunal is convened to determine the guilt or innocence of Commander Zekthor of the Vraxian hegemony on charges of war crimes, including the unauthorized execution of diplomatic personnel and the destruction of civilian populations. Ambassador Chen, you may present your case. Sarah stood and approached the center of the chamber. She had prepared this speech for weeks, refining every word, every argument. But now, standing before the galaxy, she set aside her notes and spoke from her heart. Commander Zekthor believed humans were barbarians, she began. He believed we were primitives who needed to be controlled. He believed that showing strength would make us fold, that killing a few of us would terrify the rest into submission. She paused and looked directly at Zekthor. He was wrong. But that is not his crime. His crime is that he knew better. He had access to every intelligence report about humanity. He knew our history. He knew what happens when you murder our people. And he did it anyway, not because it was necessary, but because he wanted to make a point. Sarah activated a holographic display. Images appeared showing the execution of the trade delegation, the destruction of New Prospect, the desperate defense of the colonists. 6 diplomats executed without trial, 50,000 colonists forced to fight for their lives, 83 civilians who died defending their home with mining equipment because they had no other choice. The chamber was silent. Several of the observers looked away from the images, unable to stomach the violence. But this tribunal is not about what happened to us, Sarah continued. It is about what this means for all of you. Because Commander Zekthor did not just attack humanity. He attacked the principles that hold this galactic community together. He proved that might does not make right. He proved that even the most powerful can be defeated when they ignore the rules that govern civilized behavior. She turned to address the full chamber. Humanity did not want this war. We came to the galaxy looking for friends, for trade partners, for a place among the stars. What we found was a system that viewed us as dangerous children who needed to be controlled, and when we refused to accept second-class status, we were punished. The Vraxian legal advocate stood. The prosecution makes emotional appeals, but the facts remain. Commander Zekthor acted within his authority as a military commander. The trade delegation was suspected of espionage. The colony of New Prospect refused to surrender and engaged in armed resistance. These are not war crimes. These are military necessities. Sarah felt her anger rising, but she forced herself to remain calm. Then let us talk about military necessity. Let us examine what happened when Commander Zekthor's fleet engaged human forces. She brought up data from the fleet battle. Casualty figures, tactical analyses, recorded communications. The Vraxian fleet lost 53% of its ships. By galactic standards, that is not just a defeat. It is annihilation. And it happened in 3 hours. Why? She let the question hang in the air. Because humanity learned something long ago that the rest of the galaxy forgot. War is not a game. It is not a political tool to be used lightly. It is horror and death and suffering. And when you start a war with humans, you had better be prepared to finish it, because we will not stop until either we win or we die trying. The magistrate leaned forward. Ambassador Chen, are you justifying humanity's brutal tactics? No, Sarah said firmly. I am explaining them. We did not choose to be born on a death world. We did not choose to evolve as predators. We did not choose to have a history written in blood. But that is what we are, and we do not apologize for surviving. She turned back to Zekthor. You thought you were teaching us a lesson. You thought we would see your power and submit. Instead, you taught the galaxy something far more important. You taught them what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness. Zekthor finally spoke, his voice rough. What mercy did humans show? You destroyed my fleet. You boarded my ships and killed my soldiers in close combat. You were no more merciful than I was. We offered you surrender, Sarah replied. In the middle of battle. When we could have destroyed every single one of your ships, Admiral Williams gave you the chance to live. You took it. My brother did not get that choice. The colonists of New Prospect did not get that choice. They died because you decided they were acceptable losses. The chamber erupted in discussion. Species argued among themselves about human nature, about military doctrine, about where the line between justice and vengeance truly lay. The magistrate called for order. This tribunal will recess for deliberation. We will reconvene in 6 hours with a verdict. 6 hours later, the chamber reconvened. The magistrate's verdict was read aloud, translated into 47 languages simultaneously. Commander Zekthor is found guilty of unauthorized military action resulting in civilian casualties. He is sentenced to 30 years imprisonment and is stripped of all military rank and honors. The Vraxian hegemony is ordered to pay reparations to the families of those killed at New Prospect and to the human government for damages incurred. It was not enough. Sarah knew it would never be enough. No amount of justice could bring back her brother or the colonists who died, but it was something. It was accountability, but the magistrate was not finished. This tribunal also issues a finding regarding humanity's status in the galactic community. It is clear that previous assessments of human capabilities were severely flawed. Humanity has demonstrated both military prowess and adherence to civilized principles under extreme duress. Therefore, this body recommends that humanity be granted full membership in the Galactic Council, including Permanent Security Council status. The chamber exploded in shock and protest. Several species immediately began arguing that this was too much, that humanity was being rewarded for violence. Others argued it was the only logical conclusion, that denying humanity a voice in galactic affairs would inevitably lead to more conflict. Sarah sat down, feeling suddenly exhausted. They had won, not just the trial, but something bigger: recognition, respect, fear, yes, but also a place at the table where decisions were made. 5 years passed. The galaxy slowly adjusted to the new reality. Humanity joined the Galactic Council and immediately began proposing reforms to military doctrine, rules of engagement, and civilian protections. Some species resented the changes. Others quietly adopted them. Trade between human and alien worlds flourished. Human technology, especially in medical fields and materials science, proved surprisingly advanced. Alien technology in areas like faster-than-light travel and energy generation helped human colonies spread even faster. But there were still tensions. Some species still viewed humans as dangerous barbarians. Some humans viewed aliens as weak and cowardly. The old prejudices did not disappear overnight. Then came the day when everything changed again. The Galactic Council's deep space monitors detected something massive entering known space from beyond the galactic rim. A fleet of unknown design, numbering in the thousands, was approaching at high speed. The unknown fleet ignored all attempts at communication. When they entered the outer systems, they attacked without warning. 3 colonies, 2 human and 1 alien, were destroyed in a matter of hours. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Panic filled the chamber. This new threat was unlike anything they had faced before. The technology was advanced, the tactics were brutal, and the enemy showed no interest in negotiation. The first speaker addressed the assembly. We face an existential threat. These invaders, whoever they are, do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They only destroy. We need a military response, and we need it immediately. Every eye in the chamber turned to the human delegation. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood slowly, understanding what was being asked. You want us to fight for you, she said quietly. The first speaker nodded. You are the only species with the military doctrine and experience to face an enemy like this. We are asking, Ambassador Chen. Not ordering. Asking. Sarah looked at her fellow humans in the delegation. They had fought so hard to be accepted, to be treated as equals, and now in the galaxy's darkest hour, they were being asked to be what they had always been. Warriors. We will help, Sarah said finally, but not because we are your